Alright, gang. Sorry, I'm a little sick. That's why I've just been making edits instead of speaking. I think I'm on the back end of it. Just a little cold, no big deal. Anyway, so welcome to a little TCCC series. We're going to be starting with basically the lowest tier. I think it's tier 1. Because I know some things are backwards. I think tier 1's the one that everyone goes through. Anyway, that's not the point. The mods we're going to be using is Advanced Combat Medicine, or ACM. I got my own custom settings thanks to my boy Boone. Shout out to him. And the mod, shout out to the dev of that, Blue. I'll link his mod in the description. And then there's also a mod that he's, I think, part of the dev team or whatever. I don't know, it's listed on his workshop. But it's shout out to the I think the person who made it. It's an enhanced first aid kits. I think they were a dev on the Cat Med team, so shout out to them too. For porting this mod over, I'll show it in the settings. Yep, right down. Yeah, enhanced first aid kits. And you basically have your IFAC individual first aid kit, your advanced first aid kit, and then you have your multiple first aid kit. Starting with the IFAC, this is the only one we're going to be paying attention to for this video. It's very simple, as realistic as I could get it in the confines of Arma 3 and ACM for the most part. So yeah, but anyway, so when you use this mod, it's universal. So it tells you right there an example of the code you would use, and you could change whatever you want. So again, I made this as realistic as I possibly could in the confines of the system. Now, if you go over to your arsenal, right, you go to the medical items tab. I want to point out, and this is, I'm just going to say this once, when you're using ACM, do not ever use these 4 bandages, right? Typically in an IFAC, you would have a quick clot or hemostatic bandage, but these ACE ones, they don't perform in ACM. The best way I can describe it is, say you have a large avulsion, right? And you use a quick clot, right? In real life, that would or should work, but in the confines of Arma 3 with ACM, it does not. It'll bring it down to a partial avulsion, so you have to use like 2 type stuff. Like it doesn't do everything it's supposed to. And yeah, everything else pretty much you'll use. Besides the water bottle, that's whatever. Anyway, here you'll find them. You have your IFAC, AFAC, MFAC. So I got all 3 to show y'all. Yeah. So you'll come over to the medical equipment tab, and then you'll see it right there, your IFAC, and we give you the packing list. So for mine, the way I set it up, you got 2 cat tourniquets, 2 chest seals, 2 pressure bandages, 2 emergency trauma dressings, and 3 elastic wraps. And then for pain management, we gave everyone 1 pack of paracetamol, which is just a painkiller, and Penthrox inhaler. That combo is pretty solid for the most part. Obviously, you don't want to OD, so, be mindful of that. And then you have 1 NPA, or nasopharyngeal. It's just a little nose tube. Now that that's out of the way, right? To use this equipment, it's right there. You unpack your breathing section, pain management section, bandage section, and trauma section. Now, in the real world, you use the casualties IFAC. And we obviously will simulate that here too, right? When you're doing it against AI, it doesn't matter. They don't carry an IFAC. You could probably do some coding and have each one carry an IFAC or whatever, but I'm too lazy to do that. And typically we play with actual players, so everyone, again, if we put them onto this mod and they actually use it, then they will each carry an IFAC, and you'll simply take the IFAC from the wounded's um, body and then inventory, and then you would unpack theirs. Um, or you could use yours, and then you could just take theirs in place of yours or whatever. Like, whatever works at the end of the day, because it is Arma 3. Without further ado, we will do some live demonstration. And ACM, if you guys aren't familiar with it, it just uses the Arma 3 menu. So, boop, or the ACE menu stuff. So, you got that. And I think with ACM, it ties your blood type to your Steam ID. So, no matter what, whenever you use ACM, that will be your blood type. I think you can manually change it. Like, I think there's a setting in ACM that allows you to manually set blood types and stuff. I'm not going to get into that because that's not the point of this video. So starting with the very first tier, everyone goes through it, right? So the best way, we're going to start with, let's just do, you're typically going to have a priority GSW for the most part. That's, a priority gunshot wound. Pretty much a Cat Charlie. I want to say that this is kind of, it might be a little bugged because I've had where I would do an immediate, which is like this dude needs to be pulled out of the fight via airlift, right? Casevac, medevac. I'll do a GSW with them, and then I've had their wounds be better than a priority. So it just just roll with punches. Anyway, so we're gonna start with a priority GSW. That's the best way to go about this, right? Before I do that, I'm gonna go over the March protocol. Um, this is the best way to memorize the sequence of events, basically. So starting with M in March, you have massive hemorrhaging, or in other words, massive bleeding. So you start with your blood sweep, you check each of the wounds, right? So I'll go through, I'll just because you see the color of the arm, say my arm is yellow, then that doesn't mean the wound is bad, right? Like it could just be, or it could be a red arm, and then it's like you'll look over here, it's just like a bunch of cuts and tears. You know what I'm saying? So that's why you do the sweep. You check the wounds, boom, 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 and boom, right? And if it calls for, intervention, right? Say I click on the arm, and it's, oh, I got avulsions, velocity wounds, etc. And then I finish my sweep, everything's good. It's just the arm that's screwed up. All right, cool. I move into the first stage of intervention, right? That's going to be, you're going to be applying a tourniquet, right? So you'll click on the bandage and fractures section, right? You apply the tourniquet to the limb, high and tight, and then once that's done, cool. Then we move on to the next, basically the next wound, right? If the arm is the only wound, then, you know, just tourniquet, and then we move on to the next stage in the March sequence, which from this case, like I said, we're just simulating one arm times one, just GSW. We move into the A in March, which is airway management, right? So I'm checking, you'll see a cyanosis level if the patient is unconscious, which sometimes they do, just because of wounds sustained. And again, it depends. Like if they get shot in the head, they're likely just going to fall unconscious like right off the rip. Chest is kind of, takes like a couple wounds, I think, with our current settings before they go unconscious. But anyway, you see the cyanosis level. But either way, if you have an unconscious patient, you need to intervene with the airway before it collapses on itself. So you click the head, airway management, and they'll have all your options for that. Um, the first thing you do in intervention for the airway will be you check in the airway, right? And then over here in the top right, it'll say the status of the airway, right? Airway is clear, lightly obstructed, severely obstructed, whatever, right? So from there, so let's say it's clear, I can move towards immediately towards my intervention device, which in this case with the IFAC is the NPA, or nasopharyngeal airway, the nose tube. Um, from there, right? That's all you would do, right? You only have an IFAC. Um, let's say that it was lightly obstructed or there's any obstruction whatsoever, right? You would have the option to do head turning and head tilt chin lift. I think the head tilt chin lift is broken in ACM. That's personally been my experience. Um, like it's just indefinite head tilt chin lift. But I use head turning, and that's been successful 90% of the time, at least. Um, and I say 90% because sometimes the obstruction will not clear when doing head turning, and it requires emergency suction, right? So you have an emergency disposable suction bag, and you'll just use that, call it a day, and then you'll check the airway again. Airway is clear, boom, you can move into your airway intervention device. So cool. We insert our MPA, right? We've taken care of the airway for the most part. Thinking an IFAC to give you a gill tube. I don't know. Again, I did it the best I could with what's out there in the confines of realism. Um, cool. So after the airway management section, we move on to circulation, right? So, my bad. So, pretty much the only thing you're going to be doing at the basic level is just feeling a pulse, right? And then, so you got the radial pulse, you got the carotid pulse, and then you have the femoral pulse, which is simply the arm, head, and leg, right? So you'll check the pulse, and then you'll, if you got a pulse, good to go. If it's a damaged limb, right? Say this arm, right? We TQ'd it. You're not gonna get a pulse, right? That's a dead arm, pretty much. Um, but say this arm was wounded, you might get a weak pulse. Same goes for the head. That's why you have 3 different areas to grab a pulse from. So these 2 are going to be your strongest typically, and then this one's going to be, I mean, you can see right there. Like, you know. But if all else fails, you get a leg. But leg injuries are very common, so you're likely never going to feel a femoral. Um, but you at least will get a carotid or a radial. Anyway, and then the second thing you have, right, in the examine patient tab, I probably should have said that, is check capillary refill time, right? So all this is, and you could do this in real life too, you squeeze your finger, right, your thumb against your pointer finger, and then when you let go, you count how long it takes for the color to return, right? That gives you a good idea how blood is flowing in your system pretty much when you're not using any other device, which in this case you would not, because you're at the very basic level of TCCC, Tactical Combat Casualty Care. And in this case, we see 2 seconds. That is minty. That is what you want, right? So if it's any less, it's never going to be less because, so like 1 second, just because that's just not how it works, at least in game, right? Um, but when it's any higher, you need fluids, right? So if it's 3 seconds, more than 3 seconds, 4 seconds, more than 4 seconds, less than 4 seconds, whatever the case may be, right? You need fluids. Typically, you would prefer whole blood, um, or you would prefer, in a pinch, you would want to use plasma. Now, with ACM, right, I will tell you guys this, never ever use saline. You will, I've, I got hundreds of hours with ACM. I've got some solid training from my buddy Boone, from our Ranger unit we were in back in the day. Saline with this is not simulated very well because it's just a bland saline, right? Typically, the saline you would use if you had it would um, include, it would have like minerals and stuff infused in it, which is obviously good for you. Um, so just scrap the saline. The only two fluids you need in this is plasma and whole blood. The best thing is, fresh blood when you use a vampire kit. But that's going to be at a later video. Anyway, before I get off topic, so from here back to the main point, 3 seconds or higher. Um, Anything more than exactly 2 seconds is you need fluids, and this will show for everyone who checks this casualty, right? And they, yep, any intervention you use will show on the triage card as well, which is good for the medic. Cool. That pretty much covers circulation in the March sequence. So we've covered massive hemorrhaging or bleeding, airway, and circulation. Moving on to respiratory. So this is where you're going to check your, you're going to click your airway management, click on the chest, you're going to check the chest. You're going to look, hang on. All right. Where were we? Respiration in the March process, right? So this is where we're going to be, pretty much checking the torso. You'll go to your airway section, click the torso, and then you'll have your options to check the chest rise and fall, and my bad. Anyway, yeah, so you'll be checking the chest rise and fall, and if there's no chest injury, you really don't got to worry about it. But I don't want to say you don't got to worry about it, because you do, especially if you have an unconscious patient, right? But say there is a chest injury, right? A GSW, whatever. He has an avulsion velocity wound, etc., right? This is where you're gonna really see how messed up they are. Because when you check that chest rise and fall, depending how messed up they are, right, you could have a pneumothorax, a tension pneumo, or you might even have a hemothorax, right, which is pretty bad. Pretty much, in a nutshell, a pneumothorax is when you have a GSW or some opening in the chest section, right? Which again typically will be a gunshot wound. This is where you will use your chest seal, right? I believe it's in the airway management section when you click on the chest, which I'll show a live demonstration here in a bit. And what a chest seal is, right? It's basically a one-way valve, almost, and I guess you could say, because when there's an opening, right, air is getting in as you're breathing, and it just increases the pressure. And then a tension pneumo is when it collapses, pretty much your airway, your lungs, just because of all that pressure buildup. Just in a nutshell, that's basically what it is. A chest seal prevents it from degrading into a tension. Now, as for a hemothorax, right, the way to tell for that one is typically you will see extensive bruising, right, in purple letters. I think it's the darker the purple, the worse it is. And basically what a hemothorax is, there is internal bleeding in the pleural space. There's internal bleeding in your chest cavity. And that's you're basically drowning in your own blood. Um, that stuff will obviously require a medic. Um, and within the confines of Arma 3 and ACM, there's really no way to fully treat a hemo besides evacuating your patient. So if you see hemo, like, find your medic and tell them, dude needs to be evacuated. Uh, let's use our brains here. So, that's not the point. So let's say the chest was screwed up. All right, we checked the chest. He has a GSW. Cool. I'm gonna do a chest seal, and then that's pretty much it. That's really all you do. And then from there, we will. I believe it's also airway management. You make sure you click on the chest, and then you'll then roll the casualty in. If they're unconscious, you'll roll them into the recovery position. This prevents their airway from degrading. Because even with an MPA, right, it's not going to prevent the airway from collapsing. It's the device that pretty much prevents it is an eye gel or a crike. So yeah, the more you know. So NPA or OPA, you're gonna roll the casualty into the recovery position, and hopefully, even if you will still there's still a chance, even when in the recovery, their airway will still collapse. That just indicates that they have a more serious injury than you can see, right? So don't worry about that. At least the recovery position at least buys the casualty time for the medic to check them over and clear them, right? So yeah. And that pretty much wraps it up. There's no H in March because in Arma 3 or ACM, simply because there's no head injury, in the sense like there's no like neck injury and shit. Um, so yeah, now that academics portion is taken care of, that's really it. We pretty much use the H section as more of a MISC, right? That's when you go through, you wrap your bandage wounds, wrap your clotted wounds, etc. Wrap your bruises, um, wrap your splints. What else? Yeah, that's really about it. For the and then that's when you'll use your pain management if the casualty is awake, which typically they could just do themselves, right? That's why everyone carries paracetamol and Penthrox, because for some reason everyone freaks out when their vision's blurry. That doesn't mean anything. It's just you're just in pain, right? So the way to do that, the paracetamol pack, and I do say pack because it counts as 10 pills. So just have the casualty pop 2 pills and a shot of Penthrox, and they're done. And to do that, you just click the head, medication, boom, easy. So anyway, and in this, people don't really use this. I do, like you should, right? This indicates how bad the casualty is. Say they had a GSW and an arm injury and whatever, likely their airway will collapse by the time you get to them, or not collapse. Again, it depends on the injuries, right? But if they had a chest and a arm and a leg or whatever combo, just do delayed. It's better to be safe than sorry. Be like, all right, cool, this dude's yellow or Charlie, and then have him at minimal or whatever. This just tells the medic that's coming up, be like, all right, cool, he's a little banged up. Cool, let's go ahead, intervene, make sure he's good to go, and then you can always upgrade him to green, right? So that's just the academic portion. Let's go ahead and get into the actual physical aspect of things, right? I'm just gonna pre-unpack my stuff. All right. Love being sick, I tell y'all what. So, unpack our trauma. Cool. And you can repack these as well as long as you have the stuff that goes in those sections. So in this case, the pain management, as long as you have a Penthrox and paracetamol, you'll have the option to repack, right? So yeah, the more you know. Just keep everything nice and tidy. Um, and it's not that heavy of a kit as well. So I only weigh this much because I got these both. So, but the second you unpack, the weight goes up, obviously. And you'll see why, especially with the MFAC. But anyway, so without further ado, let's spawn a patient. We're gonna go with a priority, and we'll just move closer. Priority GSW. Boop. All right, cool. So my dude dropped. Someone calls it out, or I saw him drop. Whatever. Cool. So now we're gonna start with our blood sweep, right? We have a large avulsion, then we have two large avulsions, and we have a large avulsion, right? There's large avulsions on each limb. First, we're gonna go with the leg. And now, typically, I think I had two TQs. Yeah. Cool. Alright, cool. So we just taken care of that, right? We did our sweep. Everything else is pretty much good. You don't really got to do a sweep on these white sections because they're untouched, right? That's why I didn't do them. Now here we see severe trauma, two large avulsions. We're going to immediately move to wrapping the head with emergency trauma. You have an option for pressure bandage, but it does the same thing as the stuff that I described earlier with like the ACE bandages. It'll just degrade into like a partial, and then, so you're just using a crap load of bandages for no reason. Now that that's taken care of, that's taken care of. These are no longer bleeding, so we don't have to treat those right now. That's the MISC section, right? The H section. So from here, we're moving on to the airway section. All right, I see he has slight cyanosis now, which means his airway is rapidly degrading because he's unconscious. So we're going to check the airway. It'll likely be lightly obstructed. Yep, airway obstructed. We're going to head turn. Right? And medical suction is required. This is where you request a medic. Now, I am a medic. Since I have my AFAC, I'll just unpack that. And, oh, I guess I didn't add, I should probably add it to the AFAC. MFAC for sure has it though. Where is it? Airway. Alright, cool. This should have it. Yep. Alright, use the suction bag. Cool. Airway has been cleared. And since I have it, I'm using eye gel, right? I do not want the airway to recollapse. Actually, no, I will do this the way that I am teaching it. So MPA. Alright, cool. He has an MPA. You can barely see it, but it's right there over the nostril. Slight cyanosis. What? That just degraded from moderate, or upgraded from moderate to slight? Perfect. That's what we want. Now from here, we're going to check his chest, right? We've just taken care of the airway. Now we're moving to respiratory. Oh, my bad. I'm jumping. No. It's respiratory. Yeah, R, respiratory. So we're going to go ahead and inspect chest, right? Going to make sure his chest is okay. He has rise and fall. He's still breathing. Cool, rise and fall. And from here, I'm just going to establish him in the recovery position. That prevents that airway from recollapsing and degrading. So, boom. Now, there will be times where this won't work. Like, he'll be in the recovery position, but his airway will still degrade, right? That obviously requires medical intervention at a higher level of care. So, to recap what we just did, right? We did massive hemorrhaging, massive bleeding, leg and arm. And then we wrapped up his head because you don't apply a tourniquet to the head or the chest, right? Common sense. Now, from there, we moved to the airway section. We checked his airway. We performed head turning. Head turning didn't work. It required medical suction. Cool. We used a suction bag. That cleared his airway. And then we inserted our little our nostril tube. And then we moved on to the respiratory section. Inspect his chest, made sure there's rise and fall. and then we just establish the recovery position. From this point on, you hypothetically could leave these wounds, right? Because there are the tourniquets. Blood is not flowing in these two limbs right here. And then you just get a medic to check them out. Or get your element leader, team leader, squad leader, whoever has an advanced first aid kit, right? Which is the next level of care. So from there, pretty much, boom, I'll get my gun back in the fight. And I'll just call over the net, hey, Bravo 1-3 is stable. Just get a medic to check them. Whatever the call out will be. Or, you might get your position back, your gun back in the fight, and your team leader's right next to you. Be like, hey, you got a AFAC, or whoever has AFAC, just have them check out the casualty. Cool. And clear the casualty. This point forward, the casualty will stay yellow, right? The medic is the one who will upgrade their status or degrade their status. From this case, pretty much now we're in the MISC section, right? Or no, sorry, we're in the circulation section. This one, you'll feel the pulse. Cool, we got a solid radial pulse. It's a little fast. That's okay. You could try. We still have a strong carotid. And obviously on this one, you have a strong radial or femoral. So from here, then we'll just check his cap refill, make sure he's good to go. Cool. This dude requires fluids, right? This is why we check it. When you're using IFAC, you're not going to apply fluids, right? Or administer fluids. That's why when you get your gun back in the fight, you call it out, or you let your team lead, element lead, whatever, know, hey, this dude needs fluids. And an AFAC, the next level of care, like I've already said, has, at least according to my settings, 2 units of plasma, which is 500 milliliters of plasma. Just because it's immediate fluid transfusion in a pinch, right? Which is better than nothing. That's just the way that was just my brain working. Because he might not have 4 seconds of. This is less than 4 seconds, right? So, I mean, it's bad, but it's not like terrible. And anyway, so as using it, IFAC, you're not gonna administer fluids. That's why you elevate it. Be like, hey, dude needs fluids. Just get the AFAC on the dude. Cool. So from this case, or from this point forward, that's all I can do at my current level, right? Just an IFAC. Cool. Get my gun back in the fight. And that's really about it. The next video, I will have actually like administer fluids and stuff, because the whole point of this one was just the very basic level of care. Now say the dude woke up, right? Or if you wanted to, you could go back through with that MISC section and you could wrap these wounds, but you will never take off the tourniquet. The medic will be the one who determines if the tourniquet stays or goes. Because that tourniquet realistically is their lifeline. In real life, if you take off a tourniquet too fast without medical approval, pretty much, that rush of blood could kill the patient, and you don't want that. And the reason why also I would suggest you wrap the bandaged wounds is because the bandages, after a set amount of time, will degrade and it'll be open wounds again. Just continued bleeding. So you wrap them, good to go. Bandages are good. Now we're back in the fight. So anyway, I hope that helps. That was just basic first level of care. Not a bad casualty. This dude, I'll say from a, I'm not going to say medical standpoint, but a higher knowledge standpoint, I'll say. This dude would 100% be okay. You would have to, as a medic, I would monitor him over time. But yeah, that's just about it. Little story time real quick at the end. I had a patient in game, obviously. Um, did my interventions, whatever. I think he was unconscious. I treated him with my one of my dudes, and we got him up. He was good to go, but then he quickly degraded. Um, just we put a pulse ox on him, and it just kept degrading. So I chest darted him, gave him his pain meds, everything, but he just wasn't fixing. And in that case, obviously, we made the determination after he fell unconscious. We evac'd him and got him to a field hospital, Roll 1 facility, and then treated him, and then got him back in the fight. We do it that way because we shoot for realism, and we try to do like one life stuff, um, just because I don't know, we find it more fun to do it that way. So if that interests you, I could, I'll probably throw out my server invite for that in the description as well. Anyway, thanks for tuning in, and yeah, I'll just see y'all in the next video. Cool beans.